So what if we could take an x-ray of the spiritual life, the recovery journey? It might look something like this. I think what is most true about every human being is that there is within us a place of God, a place of inner power. The 12-step program says higher power, but I like to think of it as inner power, a place of divine love. The Quakers call it the light within. The problem is, before we've lived very long, most of us get wounded. We get wounded by those who aren't able to love us the way we need to be loved, probably because they weren't loved the way they needed to be loved. But we get wounded, and we don't get wounded just once. We get wounded over and over and over and over until it's as if layers and layers of scar tissue form around our core, that place of God in us, that inner power, and we lose touch with it. Not only that, there are some behaviors that emerge from our inner woundedness. I'm going to name 4 major ones that we see all the time among ourselves in this recovery community. Fear, anger, shame, and what some people call low self-esteem. I think it's not too strong to say we see a lot of self-hatred. Now what we know is that all of these behaviors do not lead to connection. They don't lead to a sense of community, a sense of belonging. In fact, they lead to put it really simply, they lead to pain and isolation. And what do we as human beings do when we're in pain? We try to find a way to relieve the pain. So I'm going to name just 5 ways that we as human beings, out of our pain and isolation, develop unhealthy dependencies. 5 major categories where we develop unhealthy dependencies and exaggerated needs. But first, let me just say, what makes something an unhealthy dependency or an addiction? I'm going to use for this model, the definition of an addiction is when we do something and it hurts ourselves and others, but we keep doing it. We can't stop. Maybe we're not aware of the fact that we're doing it. So, we as human beings develop unhealthy dependencies in the area of control. I know a mother once who so tried to control the decisions of her adult children, she eventually drove them away from her. It hurt the mother, herself, and it hurt the children and the grandchildren to have no relationship. Another area where we as human beings, out of our pain and isolation, develop unhealthy dependencies and exaggerated needs is in the area of approval. Now, one example of that might be the person who has affairs, and what they are really looking for is not just a sexual experience. They're looking for some approval at a very deep level that they haven't manage to get. And of course, the pain of affairs can be devastating to the spouse, to the children. Another area, major area where we as human beings develop unhealthy dependencies is in the area of sensation. Now, sensation is anything we do to get a little buzz, even for just a little while, to forget or escape that deep ache within. It includes all of our favorites: drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping. It includes anything we do to escape. Any time that we try to use something external to meet a deep internal longing and something that is hurtful to ourselves and others. Now, an interesting sensation is cutting. Because cutting is not a pleasurable experience, but people tell me that the psychic, emotional, spiritual pain and isolation is so intense that they will cut so that they can experience a physical sensation which helps them to forget for just a little while that deeper spiritual, emotional, psychic pain. Another area where we as human beings develop unhealthy dependencies is in the area of security. Just one example of that. I talked with a woman yesterday who was considering going back to the man who repeatedly beat her, broke her bones. She had a scar on her face because she couldn't find a job. She was tired of being in the shelter. And he represented some kind of security. And another area where we as human beings develop unhealthy dependencies, and this one's kind of tricky, is in the area of suffering. Some of us develop a dependency on suffering as an identity. So that when the opportunity is given to choose recovery, it's too frightening. It's too frightening because it's unknown. And the familiar is our suffering. So we re-choose that which is more comfortable and familiar. There's also the idea that for some, the more they suffer, the more attention they get. That's another reason why some are not willing to let go of suffering. So, the bad news is that a lot of people in this world spend their entire lives trapped in this cycle of experiencing pain and isolation and using in one of these ways to relieve the pain, which in turn creates more pain and isolation. So they use to relieve the pain, which in turn creates more pain and isolation. A lot of people spend their entire lives trapped in this cycle. That's the bad news. The good news is there is another way out. And that is allowing our pain and our isolation to be a launching pad for us. A launching pad to a very intentional, rigorous spiritual journey. A journey that connects us to this deepest place in us, this inner power, this place of divine love. And as we spend the rest of our lives nurturing this place in us, you see what begins to happen? Some of those wounds, those layers of wounds begin to be healed from the inside out. And new behaviors emerge so that we are no longer taking our identity from our woundedness or the behaviors that flow out of our woundedness, or taking our identity from some of the ways that we try to escape our pain, but we begin to take our identity from that place of love within us. That's what we're about here at Recovery Cafe.